Good morning everyone, and welcome to these short little devotionals, little talks around glorify your Son, taken from John 17. It'd be great if you had that chapter open, John 17, and throughout this week read it each day, prayed it through, thought about it. It's largely the basis of what these are going to be about, so it'd be great just to pray it through over the week. We're going to think largely about how Jesus is glorified. We're going to think about how Jesus' glory is something he shares. We're going to think about how Jesus' glory unites us. And we're going to think about how Jesus' glory is going to be revealed. So that's a little bit of where we're going. But before we get into John 17, have you ever been awestruck? Have you ever had a moment where you've just stopped and paused and thought how brilliant or magnificent it was that you're looking at? It might be a beautiful landscape on holiday, a sunset, a starry night, a sunrise. Really looking forward to getting to Keswick to see those mist-covered mountains because they simply take your breath away. It might be the memory of a child, a grandchild that you held in your arms, and it just simply gladdened your heart. It was just so wonderful to see. When Jesus prays, glorify your Son, I think he's having something of that kind of experience in mind as we behold who he is. The word glory means to be clothed with splendour and majesty. And Jesus, I think, wants us to have that reaction when we see him. But what is his glory? Well, today I want us to think about how Jesus is glorified. That prayer, glorify your Son, I think has been answered. And if you looked at John 17 verse 5, you would think, of course, he is now in heaven, clothed with splendour and majesty at the Father's right hand. Of course he's glorified. But I think a closer look at the text will see it is that, but it's also so much more than that. To cut to the very heart, Jesus' glory, I think, is his splendour, it's his majesty, it's his brilliance in his saving actions, in his sacrificial love towards us, in how he saved us and how he is saving others and saving the world. So we can't point to one moment and say, there's his glory. But it's like the sum total of all he's done. It's a reflection of his character. Jesus is glorified. You remember when Jesus turns the water into wine in the early chapters of John, which I think is a mini drama of the gospel and how he's come to change us. John records, there he revealed his glory. If you look at the details of this prayer, Jesus says the hour has come. That is the hour of his crucifixion, where he's going to be lifted up upon a cross. And at that point he says, glorify your Son. As we've seen in verse 5, he prays, glorify me in your presence. See, the glory of Jesus is not just one moment, it's all of it in how he's come to save and rescue us. And this prayer, glorify your Son, is a prayer for Jesus to lift him up in such a way that executes the plan to save the world. In other words, show how magnificent I am, Jesus says. Glorify me by lifting me up upon a cross, so that I might take their sin away, that I might cancel their record of debt, that I might transform their rebellious hearts, and I might take the wrath that they deserve upon myself. That's a magnificent moment of Jesus. He's glorified. Glorify me. Show how magnificent I am, Jesus says, by raising me from the dead, defeating death and allowing life to triumph through my victory over it. Show how magnificent I am, Jesus says. Glorify me as you lift me up into heaven, that I might rule over the whole world for their good. Show how magnificent I am as I give our Spirit that we might make our home in the lives of these people, and so on and so on. You see how magnificent he is as we look at all his saving actions, and we're eagerly waiting the day that he returns and we might see his glory fill the world. Jesus is glorified. God has answered that prayer. He has been exalted in all these moments. The question is, do we see it? Like a sunset or those mist-covered mountains or a starry night is just as glorious whether we see it or not. So Jesus is glorified. And the question is, are we looking? The reasons we don't, perhaps, are because in Romans 1, we've exchanged the glory of God for his creation. We're about other things. We don't see it because we're transfixed on the world he's made rather than on who he is. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul says that we've been blinded. The God of this age has blinded our minds to prevent us from seeing the glory of Christ. We've been duped, we've been lied to, we've been tricked. We've been led down a road that has covered our eyes and blinded us from the glory of Christ. And so like those beggars on the side of the street in the stories of Jesus, blind as they cry out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." So our need is for the eyes of our hearts to be enlightened, that we might take our eyes off this world and fix them on the glory of Christ, seen in what he's done. That we would stop listening to the lies of what is glorious in his creation and not be blinded but have our eyes opened to the glory of who he is. Do we see the glory of Christ? If we're going to be a church that glorifies his Son, do we see it? It starts with us. We can't glorify him if we do not see his glory, if our attention is elsewhere. What barriers are there in our lives to prevent us from seeing the glory of Christ? He is clothed with splendour and magnificence and brilliance. Let's pray that our eyes of our hearts might be enlightened to see it.